All right, guys, we have another Seeing Through Gebser video today. Last week we did jurisprudence, and today we are switching on to sociology and economics. I think most of this video will probably be around sociology, and then next week or within a few days, which I'm hoping, we'll get into economics, which should be fun. First and foremost, thank you guys for your patience. I do apologize. I'm just busy. You have to make sure you're there for your family. I've also just been a little busy recently. Also, I'll be real, I haven't been super creative the past 3-4 weeks. I don't know what's been going on, but I think it's okay. I think it's okay when I have a real spell there of creativity, and now it's, relax a little bit. Let things build up, which I think is good. Also, let me know if this mic sounds really bad. I know I had some complaints like a month or two ago, and I don't think they were really fixed. I think if you guys give me some complaints, I might just buy a new microphone, even though I don't want to spend the money, but you have to, right? So without further ado, let's get into it. In the edition we're reading, we're on page 424. So we are working our way through. Now, let's get right into it, because this starts off with the based rant. Okay, sociology and economics, quoting Gebser. Since the announcement of God's death, theology has been replaced and misplaced by anthropology, which could be viewed as a pseudo-theology. Whereas man's main mode of relationship to God was a fixed, constant quantum with a paternal emphasis in accordance with his mental consciousness, the decline of the paternal attitude has rendered such a relationship obsolete. Its place has been assumed by man thrown back upon himself. The predominant question is no longer the theological man versus God, but the anthropological man versus man. This reduction and leveling, man's questioning of his relationship to himself and his surroundings, is the basis of all sociology. So after the heights of the heaven, as we like to describe it on this channel, after that gets cut, what happens? Well, man takes on the mantle of, replaces God in the mantle of who is going to be the object of reflection. Man and anthropology starts to have a more predominant place in our culture. Now, of course, what that really means is we get sociology, because once that theology, once that set, static, fixed relationship that conferred all these great benefits, and admittedly probably some bad ones, once that gets cut, well, man is thrown back on himself, and now we have anthropology and sociology, and now we're focusing on man. And Gebser has some critiques of that. Listen to this banger. Listen to this absolute banger that's coming up. Although the announcement of God's death has darkened the heavens, the earth has not become brighter. What a bar. God, some rapper should put that in there. The earth contains dead levels that are excavated just as the earthbound and deficiently magically stressed levels of the soul are excavated and revived. And the minusite of nature, the atomic world of minutus quanta, and its virulence is discovered. All this knowledge leads to the threshold of a darkness of life and spirit. Man has become a grave digger, but is humanity intent on digging its own grave? So Gebser really, really does not like that we have cut the heavens. He's not going to necessarily try to replace it, because we're going to talk about that. But he thinks that if you cut the divinity in man, you're going to start seeing some problems. And that's exactly what we have. And Gebser is not a fan of that. Now, whether you think that's acceptable, that's on you, right? You have your own experiences, your own way of doing things. I'm not here to determine that for you. But he does, under no circumstances does he think that men left to their own devices without any sort of spiritual, religious direction or something, no, it's not going to happen. I think what he would describe it as, you can try to ignore God, whatever God that is, but God cannot be ignored, even if you try. So it will happen, and it is what it is. He is not a fan of this. That doesn't necessarily mean he's a fundamentalist, irrational, irresponsible, religious kind of zealot. That's not what I'm sure he believes in separation of church and state and all these things. And don't get me wrong, but he's not a fan of the anthropological centric view that we've been doing the past couple of centuries. This is the one salient and obvious aspect. Is there another? Can a blind world exclude God, who cannot be excluded, just because it had projected its own outmoded patriarchal aspect of the mental consciousness structure onto God? So that's another problem with the atheists. They're not really deconstructing God as it is, because God as it is a giant mystery. What they're doing is they're deconstructing the anthropological projection of God, where God becomes like a human being like us with the big beard, and he has all this mental, rational stuff. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you're, I assume if you're into this video, you know my views on this. That's absurd. It's ridiculous. Can such a world continue to exist after the destruction of heaven and the fall into the grave-like abyss of the earth? Can such a humanity, for this does not concern only its western part, renew itself and reverse its descent into hell? Of course, remember, this was written on the backdrop of World War II. Although we cannot be certain, we can presume so, since the first signs of a fundamental restructuration are becoming visible. We were not entrusted to the earth to lose ourselves for its sake. Whoever does so perishes with it. But will those who do not succumb be able to surmount the gaping abyss? The insignificance and helplessness of the massive sociological efforts seem to speak against such success. The same dread and horror which once overshadowed the mutation from the mythical to the mental, as manifest in the matricide of the Orestia, Oresteia, are amassing throughout the world during our present transitional epoch. It has accomplished patricide and thus sealed the ultimate fate of mental predominance. But it was not God who was murdered, it was the Father. We saw this with the king, of course, the French Revolution. Patricide, the masculine, paternal director, boss, that's gone. In particular, the predominance of patriarchy within ourselves has been superseded, and thus we too have transcended the conceptualized God. Like the Old Testament demand, the co-founder of the mental consciousness, that man should not fashion an image of God, the corresponding requirement today is that we should not conceptualize God. The undistorted divine must be perceptible in its transparency. Beautiful. Do not make an image of God, which is ironically, I think a lot of rationalist atheists, it's a lesson they need to learn. Because the way they talk about like social justice and all this stuff, it really is as if they're playing God and they want to get rid of like every single aspect of the world. And it's just, I don't know what to tell you. You're just kind of delusional. So don't make an image of God, which means it's okay to participate morally and not be perfect and not be a Jesus figure. It's okay. Hello, members of the right. And don't conceptualize God because that's a bastardization. We know that. That's rationalism. Let's see. As the command to renounce God's image meant the supersession of the deficient mythical consciousness, the demand to avoid conceptualizing God is the supersession of the deficient mental rational consciousness. As already noted, this is a marker pointing across the abyss into which many are plunging and will continue to plunge as long as they regard the task only from its negative aspect as a renunciation and not from its other aspect as work yet to be done. It is not the task of today to replace what has been superseded by something. One such attempt to contrive a substitute was the Fichtean ego, which Goethe ridiculed. Fichte maintained that an ego, das Ich, should be replaced by a masculine ego, der Ich. But a mere placing in another's place, that is, replacement, is tantamount to an enthronement which always has patriarchal three-dimensional properties. So simply replacing what was destroyed with the exact same thing, it's not going to do anything. Remember the Toynbee quote. Only birth can conquer death, the birth of the new. We are thus confronted by something fundamentally different, with a task in a twofold sense. The renunciation of the paternal principle is a liberation. For the moment, it is the last and most decisive liberation that will permit mankind to achieve an undistorted rather than one-sided understanding of the divine. Every sociology, every aspiration that does not reach the truly divine via relationships among persons is merely a renunciation, grave digging without resurrection, although resurrection is imminent even in the dawning of every new day. A basic error of all contemporary sociology is the assumption as self-evident that there are reliable human interrelationships, be they social, emotional, or whatever. But in mental terms, the genuine bond between persons goes always through God. To express it mentally once again, the valid point of relationship resides in Him. All other interhuman bonds that neglect this fundamental aspect are merely deliria, transient feelings, and shifting projections of the transitory ego. While searching for the traces of aperspectival reality, we may despair at finding any in contemporary sociology, and yet they are present. So, it's also, honestly, it's a little bit of a criticism for Gebser. He says these things. I wish he would explain them a little more. Like he just kind of explains as fact that the ultimate bond between humans is through God. I mean, again, I'm not against that argument necessarily, but you're gonna have to put in some work to prove that, right? Like, I mean, why? I feel like a sociologist would have something to say. Like, even like your classic conservative Republican would be like, well, what about family? You know what I mean? It's a little frustrating that he doesn't pick up on this. I don't, it's not that there are reliable human interrelationships. I mean, again, I like the idea that spirituality is that sort of ultimate force or whatever you want to call it that binds humans. I'm all for it. Don't get me wrong. Maybe he's referencing this idea that like we will avoid conflict because we're all brothers or creations of God or something like that. Again, that's fine, but it could be a little more clear, unfortunately. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. For what is the point of preaching an ethos or regaining a religion when both have died? What has been done cannot be undone. What is the good of directing competition and the distribution of goods and engaging in market analysis in order to, quote-unquote, justly apportion the products acquired by common labor, if all relevant theories fail to exclude special interests? Or what is the use of philosophical and religious edifices of thought, recognized only by an ineffectual minority, when they originate from the personal attitude of an individual thinker and are ultimately unconvincing? All of these decade-long attempts to manage the material, the ideal, the political, and other relationships among men have as yet only created more confusion. The misunderstandings increase. Moreover, counter to all sincere efforts of sociology, certain political and social circles are intent on increasing these misunderstandings. So I think what he's saying is we've done a little bit an experiment without gods, and we've had this little anthropological experiment, and it hasn't worked. And again, again, everything has to be understood on the backdrop of World War II. So I think it's possible that he just sort of said, hey, look outside the window. That's all the evidence I need. Now, of course, as time goes on, events change and there's differences, but I think it's possible that's what he's leaning on. I think what he's saying is it's simply better for us as an individual and as a collective to have some sort of spiritual anchoring that helps us. Because when we try to do it on our own, what do we get? We get endless wars, World War I, World War II, and nonsense. The prospect is a darkened heaven and an earth that is becoming a grave. This dual diminishment breeds the ghost of forbidden enrichment, which under these conditions can be manifest only materially. So once you drop the spiritual do's and don'ts, once you drop the spiritual perspective, which informs you and transmits spiritual knowledge, so you say, hey, don't do this, that's what you do. And then we get terrible things like World War I and II. Greed for power and profit grow, and those who have succumbed to them do not see that the grave they are digging is also their own. To overlook these palpable realities is to have a total lack of common sense. It is impossible to change them. Such a mentality is bent on death, and at best it will collapse of itself. Okay, let's skip down a little bit again. The time-bound political aspect, as well as the outmoded consciousness of Marxian materialism and its emendation by Asiatic despotism, so of course Mao's China and Lenin and Stalin's Soviet Union, its heritage born of resentment and its resentment-laden ideology and one-sided pseudo-religiosity, which suggests, he's talking about Marxism, which suggests that it be given only the most cursory investigation. Its fanaticism precludes any possibility of deperspectivization, although its demand for the recognition of labor is a most decisive and significant step and has aided in the breakthrough of the main theme of our transitional epoch. It has, nevertheless, paradoxically remained mired in hypertrophied materialism of a dialectical kind, and regards work, the predominant temporal element, merely as a quantity, thus degrading it to a mere measurable material quantum. Although its mission was to supersede rationalistic materialism, its reversion to it is explicable in terms of its source. It stems from the irrational left, which with its inherent psychic determinism, for which the rational is the new element. Confirm my biases. Yes, affirm my biases. I even wrote, based. Yes. So it doesn't necessarily make it true, But Gebser does agree with me that Marxism is resentment-based, and it is not a transcendence to irrationality. It is a regression, which is obvious because we don't stick in the world of pure theory. So every time we see it applied, it leads to terrible disasters. It's common sense. It does come from irrational nonsense. The idea that the allocation of scarce resources with alternative uses, which is what economics is, by the way. Anytime you want to see if someone knows what they're talking about politically, just ask them, hey, real quick, what separates economics from finance? And just see what they say. Oh, they're both money, one of my exes told me. God, no. Economics is the allocation of scarce resources with alternative uses. The idea that said allocation is more effective and efficient by centralizing all power and moving all decision-making ability to someone with the least knowledge, interest, and experience in your circumstance, precludes himself from the consequences of his effect, and takes so long that by the time he has all of his data, all of us individuals can make our own economic arrangements that are more effective and efficient. It is absurd. It is irrational nonsense, and that's why you get terrible application. Confirm my biases. Yes. Okay. The new manifests itself in sociology in the following indications. 1, in the consideration of time. 2, in the supersession of dualism. And 3, in a tendency towards irrationality. Okay. A consideration of Marxism leads immediately to 1, the consideration of time. Seen not only from the standpoint of jurisprudence, but also of sociology, the new evaluation of labor is a sociological form of the eruption of time. This trend was prepared by the peasant wars and was already visible in them. It was stabilized by Puritanism, particularly in the United States of America, where, as Max Weber has shown, work was elevated to an almost religious maxim. It permeated the French Revolution. It was later formalized by Marx and Engels. It gained worldwide significance via the 3 Russian revolutions, of which the first occurred during the crucial year 1905, the year of Einstein. The acceptance of this new aspect of time has transfigured human life after thousands of years at its very root. So what he's referencing out, of course, is time as a quality. Work is no longer being seen as a mere expenditure of energy to produce goods and services. No, you are embodying qualities, and you're not just working, you're working, which is to say you're contributing to society. The qualitative valuation of working has improved, and we're going to get into that. Not only the left's struggle for equality, but also its claim to supremacy, indeed its claim to exclusivity, although counter to the elements of the merging future, as well as its retention of a quantitative estimation of work time, has left it caught up in rationality. This despite its temporic conception and the fact that Marx and Lenin regarded labor as a qualitative value. Even Khrushchev advocated labor as a quality at the Party Congress in October of 1961. As has been demonstrated with all objectivity and requisite restraint by Ludwig Preller. The postulate of freedom, which is fully... This is another thing. The postulate of freedom, which is fully and validly realizable only a-rationally and assumes indeterminacy and at least partial a-causality, has been turned into its opposite by Oriental tyrannical Bolshevism, into slavery. What does that mean? I have no idea what that means. The postulate of freedom, which is fully and validly realizable only a-rationally and assumes at least partial a-causality. Why? Why, Gebser? Because you insist on it? Can you explain why? Are you just going to mention that and not explain why? What is the true concept of freedom? What is it? You haven't given me anything. What am I supposed to do with this? Okay. I don't take that seriously. Not because he's not saying anything. Well, it's not that the idea necessarily is something I dismiss, but if you're not going to give me an argument, if you're going to tell me that Marxism turned freedom into slavery, no shit. I don't need a fucking consciousness foundation to know that, obviously. The other postulate, that of brotherhood, is present only in the Russian man, but not in the party member, yes. The third postulate, that of equality, has, despite the recognition of personhood in the community, sunk to a mere leveling and inhuman collectivization of man, manifesting only a deficient form of society or community. Hello, equity. That is exactly what equity does. It sinks to a mere leveling and inhuman collectivization of man. That is equity. When you falsely and ridiculously assume that a bunch of different inputs would create equal outputs, And you realize that it's very difficult to suddenly and quickly take someone who's dumb and doesn't know anything and have them achieve as much as someone who's intelligent and knows a lot. What you do is you just tear down the one who's intelligent and knows a lot. So now what do we get? We just get this unbelievable regression in terms of quality of the collective. Well done, everyone. I'm glad we have the left here to improve our collectivization. Well done. We are indebted to the socio-political work of Ludwig Preller for a decisive advance. In his evaluation of work and leisure, he distinguishes with previously unachieved clarity, clock time, and time quantity from qualitative time and the requisite qualities of time. Since he proceeds from structures as spatio-temporal interconnections, he successfully surpasses static systematics and unmasks the false and oblique alternatives and dualisms, resulting in a new constellation of the social order and sociopolitics, which for him flow into a social polity. Both works of Lakowski considered here endeavor to incorporate qualitative time into the economic thought. Yes. Let's see. He proceeds from the concept of Gestalt, widely used during the 1930s, to come to grips with the qualitative elements. Yet he also defines Gestalt thinking as structural thinking and distinguishes it from quantitative numerical thinking. So that's a real fancy way of saying economics is no longer focusing or viewing time purely as time as a quantity, which is obviously, more conducive towards billable hours, right? Now we're going to do time as a quality. Not only the qualitative evaluation of work has improved, not only is the act of working embodying certain qualities, but we're also trying to focus more on, are you giving me high quality and output, right? Are you giving me high quality work? Screw the time for a second. Who cares if you did in 20 minutes or 2 hours? Are you giving me high quality work? I think more companies could use this because the incentives they create are really dumb. The proverb, time is money, is a typical product of the abstract numerical thinking in economics. The contrary notion that time works for us is a recognition of concrete economic thinking. After all, the qualitative time experience is the essential aspect for the scholar and humanities. For him, life and events are not a qualityless unrolling of a temporal course as if it were a dead framework that can be sliced and chopped, i.e. destroyed by metrical beats into equal time quanta, or segments. Rather, it is a meaningful unfolding and completion. It is not ruled by meter, but by rhythm. So, as time unfolds, it's 10:19, and then 10:20, 10:21. I'm experiencing this time, right? There are certain qualities. Now it's a sort of calmness. Maybe if I get a call saying my grandmother dies, it'll be sadness, of course, depression, or whatever it is. Qualities. We should know this by now. The characteristics of rhythm, however, is that its back and forth in fulfilling the specifically valid laws of meaning is uneven when measured against the uniform marks of the stopwatch, and yet it acquires in itself an equal significant value, even though it is qualitatively not comparable. Lisowski himself comments on these statements, quote, "Since our concepts and forms of thought are ultimately quantitative, it is possible to reach the deeper foundation of things only suggestively by life-preserver words. His insight into the necessity of time-related thinking, of time as a quality, is relevant to the total formation of political economics. Above all, to work hours, wage evaluation, marketing and distribution time, and valuation. And he comes to the conclusion that, quote, in industrial economy, we must understand time and its course in a dual manner, as a uniform, exact, qualityless temporal interval, clock time, or time with interest, like giving loans and stuff, and as a value-infused and value-setting succession of historical formative processes, where the division into equal quantities has only the secondary import as an aid to order." So let me give you some examples. Let's say I'm in a meeting. So in 25 minutes in the meeting, I'm doing my little presentation. And I realize that everyone's asleep. Everyone's dead asleep. No one's paying attention. Clearly, my little plan here is not working. The quality of this meeting, the quality of the time spent during this meeting is low. We're not coming up with any new ideas. We're not resolving any conflicts. We're not saving any money. We're just going through the motions. So the reason people do that is because they know all I have to do is stick it out for an hour or two, and I'll get paid by the clock. But shifting the emphasis from quantity to quality will say, look, my meeting isn't going well. I'm throwing away my system. Let's just have an open chat. What is going on? What are some of the ideas that you can give? I had planned to talk about A, B, and C. Talk to me about D through Z. Talk to me about this. Let's spitball. Let's brainstorm. Let's do all this stuff. You see what's happening here? We're no longer focusing on just getting through the day. Who does that help? Now we're focusing on quality. Another example could be, and you see this in business a lot. I think people are starting to finally get this. Let's say I have starting a business and I want to hire some graphic design team to create my logo. I have the logo. Let's say two companies do the exact same logo. One took a year, or maybe not a year. One took a month to create it. The other took 20 minutes. Actually, yeah, the other took 20 minutes. The rationalist will say, I'm going to give my business to the one who took a month because they took longer, because apparently that means something. But in reality, all you need is the higher quality logo, and that's it. Who cares if it took 20 minutes or a month to make it? Let's focus on quality, not just the quantity. So these are examples of the switch from quantity to quality. Another example of the switch from quantity to quality would be, of course, workers' unions. I can't remember if we talk about this later on, but workers, of course, time as a quality is what brought us workers' unions. No longer are we focused on no longer is the human being, and we do have the left to thank for this, no longer does the human being become just a mere object to be pushed around to create goods and services. The quality of the work experience is important. So yes, we are going to implement certain safeguards. No, we are no longer going to have 6-year-old children in coal mines, which is completely, I'm more than on board with. Some of these, some of these guys just, I don't know. You have to have certain breaks. You have to have certain conditions. You can't breathe in certain pesticides or air that's dirty or whatever or toxic. We're shifting to quality. Now, I have problems with the workers' unions in 2026, but that's because I think they're bad economically. That's kind of a separate thing. But workers' unions and the improvement of work as a quality. So the working man is seen as someone who is respectable rather than seeing someone who is a slave or a serf. In many ways, you are not a contributing member to society unless you work. We have the left to thank for that. The switch from quantity to quality. Of course, as I just laid out, the workers' unions. We have the left for that. And then what else? There was another thing. Yeah, I think that's good. But those are two big points spearheaded by the left that have improved the society, I believe. And all of that is a product of switching from quantity to quality. So I think we'll end it there today. We're going to probably a longer video next week. I'm going to try my best to get this to you within the couple of the coming days. I've just been really exhausted recently. I do apologize, guys. So let me know what you guys think, and let me know if you guys have ideas. Let me know if you had any problem with my microphone, because I might have to go buy a new one. Unfortunately, that would suck, but it is what it is. I love you guys. I apologize. I was a little tired today, but I'll see you guys soon. Thank you, guys.